Good evening, everyone. I'm Ed Gallagher. I'm president of the American Scandinavian Foundation, and I'm delighted to welcome you this evening to the second program in Nordic American Connections, Conversations on Architecture, a four-part series that brings together leading architects, critics, and scholars. They're exploring the long-standing influence of Scandinavian and Nordic design on American architecture and design from the 19th century to the present. Our panelists tonight include Matthew Lister, Managing Director of Gehl Americas, and Rachel Schiffmann, Architect and Interior Architecture Discipline Director at Snøhetta, and Stephen Holl of Stephen Holl Architects. The series continues with two more programs this spring. On Thursday, March 19th, we have Women in Nordic Design and Architecture, Craft Meets Industry. On May 14, we have Next in Nordic American Architecture. Tonight's program is part of an ongoing celebration of the 25th anniversary of Scandinavia House. This is our cultural center and our home. Since its opening in October 2000, we have welcomed more than 3 million visitors and presented over 3,000 programs. Over the years, we have remained committed to building international cooperation and understanding through educational and cultural exchange, keeping in touch with the mission of the American Scandinavian Foundation, which was founded in 1911 here in New York. There are a number of programs that are being offered in celebration of our 25th anniversary, as well as many other programs, and I encourage you to check out our website, scandinaviahouse.org, and to attend as many as you can. All of our 25th anniversary programs are supported by the Monica and Charles Heimbold Fund for Exhibitions and Programs. Our thanks go to many people to make this possible, including Emily Stoddart, who is our manager of visual arts and exhibitions. But most particularly, our moderator for this evening is Susan Chin, and we thank her for bringing the series to life, and to AIA New York, AIA Continental Europe, and DesignConnects for their partnership. And now, I'd like to welcome Susan to the microphone.
Thanks, Ed. And I feel like I'm going to repeat some of the things that you've already said, but one can never hear them too many times, I hope. So I thank you so much. It's been a privilege to work with you and with Emily and Eve on this program. We welcome all of you to our second panel, as Ed was saying, of the Nordic American Connections, Nordic in New York City, established and newer, in collaboration with AIA New York and AIA Continental Europe and my own organization. We also hope you'll join us on March 19th to hear for Women's History Month, Women in Design and Architecture, Craft Meets Industry, and on May 14th for Next in Nordic American Architecture, Resilience Meets Wellbeing. And as I was saying to some of our colleagues here, I'm so happy that I've got lined up for March 19, Eve Jensen of Eve Jensen Design, Jennifer Yost from VJAA in Minneapolis, and Suchi Reddy of Ready Made here in New York. So in celebration of Scandinavia's house building and the Nordic Center in America, we kicked off the series with Nordic influences in America the last 25 years in November, and we examined Nordic design's pivotal role in the modern movement in America. We also saw an opportunity to examine how the Nordic approach of complete design, human-centered design, environmental stewardship, and craft can offer valuable, resilient strategies and tools for climate action, health, and well-being for today and in the future. We've invited contemporary Nordic and American designers and those with Nordic sensibilities to share their innovative work and practice. So today, we focus on cross-cultural influences from Denmark, Norway, Finland, and the US, with firms who've transformed our streetscapes, public spaces, and public buildings. how the first American Architects Museum and Urban Design contributed to development in Helsinki, and new design approaches for beauty and well-being. So I'm pleased to introduce our speakers in the order that they'll present. You'll also find their longer bios on Scandinavia House's webpage. Our speakers will make brief presentations, and then we'll follow up with a moderated conversation, and I hope your insightful questions. So Matthew Lister, as Ed had introduced, is the partner and managing director at Gehl Americas. And I do remember Matthew when Jan Gehl came to work with the Bloomberg administration to transform our public spaces. Who would think that you could ban cars from Times Square? And that was so radical, and now it seems so much a part of our culture. And then Anne Rachel Schiffmann, who's an architect and interior architecture discipline director at Snøhetta, New York. I first met Craig Dykers and Elaine Molinar 20 years ago. I feel like I've met all these people so many years ago. I feel like an old person. I am an old person. And I remember when they were first starting their practice here. And I was wondering, why are the Danes and the Norwegians all coming to New York and establishing an outpost? It just seemed so interesting as a business model, or what was it about New York? And I think just having that kind of cross-cultural experience, and I hope you'll share some of that from the practice, was something that to me was of particular interest. I had been working for city government at the time. And then Stephen, we'd met years ago with the start of Storefront for Art and Architecture, and when I worked on Poets House, and you helped to create that in Lower Manhattan. So I feel like there's this thread that carries through of my tie to so many of you, and I know I'm an Asian girl, but and Nordic architecture. The kind of sensibilities for me relate back to stewardship of the earth and really a love of nature that grew out of my childhood. My mother was born in Fall River, Massachusetts, of all places, and that Yankee sensibility for me and the stewardship of our planet was very much a part of my upbringing. So with that, I turn it over to Matthew, and thank you so much. I look forward to hearing your insightful conversation.
Good evening, everybody. It's good to be here. Congratulations to the Scandinavia House for 25 years. It's an honor to be part of that celebration. I'll just start by saying I'm an outlier here. I am not going to be talking much about architecture. I'm probably going to be talking more about the life between buildings, which is, how many here have heard of Jan Gehl or know a little bit about Jan Gehl? Okay, great, quite a few of you. And as always, I have way too much to present with not enough time. So I will be skipping slides as we go, just to try and keep up with the time. I'm going to start off a little bit depressing, and then get kind of a bit more depressing, and then really dismal, and then I'm going to try and climb out of the hole that I created. So just to get everybody comfortable with me skipping slides, I'm going to skip the first three just right out of the gate, and start with this. And I just want everybody to think for a moment in a city, in this city, and another city where you have felt yourself exhale. Like maybe you could relax for a minute. And where were you? And what made that possible? And I kind of want to start tonight by acknowledging that for many people, that exhale is actually harder to come by. That there's a lot of pain in our cities right now. We're experiencing social fragmentation, economic uncertainty, climate change, social unrest and violence, I mean, the stuff that's going on in Minneapolis is just, it's heartbreaking. You can hardly even imagine it. A massive and ongoing erosion of trust. Cities are under pressure and people are exhausted. And I keep asking the question, like, where will we heal? How will we start to heal, and where will that happen? And I want to also say that we didn't get here overnight, that for decades, so much of what has shaped our world has been focused on reorganizing human activity into distinct silos, where we separate people and things in order to reduce risk, increase efficiency, and minimize conflict, and that we've often prioritized the technical outcomes over the human outcomes. So we say, the streets must be safe from cars, instead of saying, we want to be able to let go of our children's hands and see them play on our streets. Do you hear the difference there? It's a major difference, and it's driving a lot of what we see in the world today. And over time, the everyday places where we encounter one another become more regulated and more managed and less inviting. And we're really feeling the impacts of that now, I think, because when those everyday moments and everyday encounters disappear, we don't just lose the activity, we lose the conditions that allow trust to grow. And when public life erodes, trust erodes along with it. I told you it was going to get dark, right? Trust in institutions and trust in each other. And trust isn't abstract. It's something we experience or don't through everyday interactions. And we forget that it depends on people feeling safe and comfortable enough in their bodies to recognize one another's common humanity. And why does trust matter? It's what makes cooperation possible. It's what holds and allows institutions to function. It's what allows diverse societies to hold together. It's like trust is like the fertilizer of a functioning society, and without it, very little else works. And so we see in Nordic countries, that people actually trust each other. It's a pretty significantly high number. And in the US, it's much, much lower, right? So what do the Nordics have that we don't? This is where it's going to start getting better. Everybody ready? Again and again, what seems to matter the most are the quieter, more fundamental conditions of everyday life. And the Nordic influence on cities isn't primarily about architecture or form, actually. It's about a long-term civic devotion to human well-being, one that over time builds trust in the institutions that show up and deliver and create spaces where people build trust with one another through shared experiences and connection. And Gehl is a Danish company, and we've been working in the US for 20 years now, and I think over that time we've identified some key civic principles that have brought our work from home, and our work into the US from our home in Denmark. And they go like this: prioritize public life, that's number one. Start with human-centered fundamentals. Define success with human outcomes. Practice consistent devotion over time. That consistent care, that we're going to continue to care over and over and over again over time, is actually a civic act and a trust-building one. And then we treat public comfort and joy as serious outcomes, real outcomes. So I'll start in by saying, what is public life? Public life is the thing that we create when we live our lives outside of our homes and our businesses and our cars. And Gehl has been studying public life and the conditions that invite for it for over 50 years now. And what we're really looking at is the relationship between life and form. So how do the spatial conditions of a place actually influence the behavior of a place? And how does it make people feel? Does it make people feel good or bad? And so I'll just run through a few examples of how we look at the world right now. We first start with our client. A slow, linear, horizontal, maximum 3-mile-per-hour walking creature with a great interest in other people. We understand that despite our differences, and we see those differences played out across the screens in our worlds all the time, that there's very much a lot about us that's the same, right? We're more or less the same height. We move at more or less the same speed. We use our senses often in the same way to engage with and understand the world that we're in. Really interesting things like this. So a happy brain needs about 1,000 stimulations per hour, which is about 1 per every 4 seconds. And when you think about that, if you're moving at about 3 miles per hour, that's 1 per every 20 feet, which is about the rhythm of a really great street. And then when you compare that to a blank wall, and this wall is a beautiful wall, it's got the finest stone that money can buy, but people will walk past it faster and think that it takes longer. And it's really important for us to understand this stuff that's in us, in our human biology, and how that impacts the way that we feel in places. We have spent a lot of time trying to figure out what are the basic characteristics of public spaces that invite more people in to stay longer. And we've boiled it down to these 3 categories, right? One is safety and protection. If you don't have safety and protection in a public space, it really doesn't matter how beautiful it is or how well designed it is or how many design awards it's won, people are not going to be there. If you don't have comfort, people might go there, but they won't stay very long. And then the third category is when you're really going well and you've got something that's enjoyable or delightful, which puts that public space on the mental map of the people that visit it. We often see places where they do something beautiful, like a beautiful piece of art, but they don't actually provide the comfort. So people might come to see the art, but they'll never stay because there's nothing that keeps them there to make them comfortable. So for us, it's really important actually to go out and watch and observe and measure the things that people are doing. And if I had more time, I'd go into a lot more detail about this, but we measure what people are doing when they're moving. We measure what people are doing when they're staying. We measure things beyond what the eye can see. We try and get that like user experience and design gap to be a lot closer. And as Susan said, this is an example of where all of this comes together. And I think most of you have experienced Times Square, but we were working with the Bloomberg administration, with Susan and many, many other people, some of who are in this room, I think. And we helped people see, the Bloomberg administration in particular, see that Times Square at the time was 10% public space, 90% people on foot, and then 90% of the space was actually for cars, and only 10% of those people were in the cars. And so the dynamics were completely flipped. There was no square on Times Square. And so using that data and that observation and that sort of ethos and thought behind it, we were able to, I think, promote a really big and risky idea. And it was so exciting to see New York City take that on and test it and refine it and move it over time to the permanent condition that's there now. I'm going to skip this social infrastructure stuff. If anybody's interested in this, you can come to me afterwards. We can do like an unplugged session at the end. And I want to end with this, with the Copenhagen waterfront. And the reason I want to talk about the waterfront is because this worked only because Copenhagen, decades ago, decided that they were going to prioritize the experience of human beings across almost all decision-making and spending in the city. And so doing something like this, making the waterfront accessible, doesn't happen unless you are devoted to it and in love with it, really, for decades. And it's a beautiful thing because waterfronts are magnetic, they draw people to the water's edge, they supercharge equity and joy when designed for access and inclusion. At their best, waterfronts combine all the elements of great social infrastructure. And so that doesn't happen, though, unless decades ago you start to commit yourself as a city to build out a human-centered place over time, right? And it's just so fascinating to see Copenhagen, you know, pedestrianizing, improving, reaching itself out to the waterfront. The waterfront city starts to emerge in 2011, but this is after 30 years of really committing themselves to changing the way that people interacted and lived in the city of Copenhagen. So there was this turning point in the mid-90s where they had the political vision and will, and I think that political vision and will was really built on that multi-decade commitment to making an awesome place, making Copenhagen an awesome place, to actually do the hard work underneath and clean the water. And that took a decade and a half to get that done. And I don't know any of the engineering behind it, but they did all this stuff, and it worked, right? And so in 2002, they had Bjarke Ingels design this, the first of the harbor baths. And it was a way to say, hey, I know you haven't thought about the water as a resource at all. It's been like an industrial waterfront, but we've cleaned it. We're proving to you that we've cleaned it. And boy, this could be a lot of fun. So why don't we jump in together and see what that's like? And so now they have over 16 bathing zones across the city. 2 million people use the harbor every year. There's like a 50 to 100% increase in property value for water-facing units, which is important, but that's not the reason they did it. These are just other outcomes of that process. And I can't overstate how transformational this has been for the everyday life of Copenhagen. It's amazing. Like me, modest, like Midwestern kid from Peoria, Illinois, has found myself like in the middle of the week on like a weekday, like stripping off, putting a towel around my waist and putting a swimsuit on to jump in the water for a few minutes before I head back to the office. It's delicious. It's like a delicious experience, and it's totally life-changing. So to conclude, I think the question that I asked about this, and maybe in the context of the larger idea of devoting ourselves over decades to making a place wonderful, it's like, why spend years and decades even working towards something like a swimmable city in this case? And in this case, it's so much more than just building infrastructure. It's about meeting a deep human desire. In this case, we're drawn to the water. We always have been. It's biological. It's emotional. It's even spiritual for many. We don't just want to see it. We want to be with it. We want to float, to plunge, to gaze, and to breathe, and to feel alive. The water's edge is where the sun rises and sets. Like, it's incredibly magical and poetic. What a wonderful idea to actually commit to such a big undertaking for such a poetic idea. And we're living in intense times, and cities are under pressure, and so are the people that live in them. So a harbor bath, in that case, is not just a cool public space design feature, and it's undeniably cool, right? It's actually an invitation that says, you are allowed to feel good here. You're allowed to feel good. You're allowed to just play and to rest. And when that invitation is made to everyone and not just some, that's very, very powerful. And you might say that that's actually healing, and a healing force in our cities. And I think that cities that create these spaces and places, these places for joy and for healing, are cities that really understand people. And in the face of what we're seeing today, like, I think we spend a lot of time, like, how do we invite for connection and create better social cohesion and create more trust? I think it might be worth us dialing back a little bit from that and just saying, how do we make places that invite people to feel good? Just to feel good. So, thank you. I went over by like 2 minutes, and you can take my question away if you want. But thanks.
But I love it, especially. Thanks a lot for having me. Thanks a lot for such an inspiring talk. Thanks and congratulations to the anniversary. I'm a senior architect. I'm heading up our interiors department in the Americas. We've been established about 40 years ago in Oslo, about 20 years ago in New York, 10 years ago in Innsbruck, Paris, Hong Kong, Adelaide, and the last 3 years in Shenzhen. We're architects, landscape architects, interior architects, product designers. And we're named after a mountain in Norway, about 3 hours outside north of Oslo. And this is the area it is in. It's called Dovre National Park. And every few years, we try to come together as a group, as a company, and share ideas, take pause, take rest, check in with each other, and have a series of conversations. It's a multi-day event. And this is the Reindeer Pavilion. So this was taken about 3 years ago. We are getting together. We have these conversations. We enjoy the landscapes around. We listen to each other. Last year's conversation topic was singular in the plural. And 3 things happened that time that were quite interesting, quite special. I've been a few times on that mountain, but muskox are extinct, and they've been just repopulated, rehabilitated in that neighborhood. So we saw wild muskox, and it's fantastic. I don't know how I can turn on the video. Whoops. There's a little video of that little family of muskox running away, and this is something that is quite special. Our Norwegian colleagues that were part of it, they couldn't believe their luck seeing them so close up. So it was really, really special. The other special thing was the Sami musician Mari Boine was singing for us, and this is also an extremely very rare treat. A bit earlier, a few days earlier, we were in the Oslo Opera House, and we had a classical concert just for us in the lobby to test the acoustics. This is the the alternate program to it, very special. And then finally, at the last night, the last evening, when we all kind of went out the tents and went for a breather, we thought of Northern Lights over these very mundane 4 cars and parking space. So that was just super special. Other people were like traveling that year, who knows where. So that was quite special. Which reminded me of another natural phenomena that served as inspiration for one of our projects in Canada, the new Central Library in Calgary. The Chinook cloud that brings in warm air from the Canadian Rockies really served as design inspiration to the shape of the building that actually was, with its arch form, inviting people through the building, connecting the downtown center to the east side of the city. So a building not separating a city, but really being a gateway to another part of the city, bringing people in. And then, the vibrancy of the program, of the people making this space available and being part of it. And we really were taken by the client's notion of wanting to make the space accessible, not just physically, but emotionally accessible to everybody in the city, inviting recent immigrants in there, new parents, and there's quite a sizable unhoused First Nation population in Calgary that still has been part of this library. So it's a very important part of the city to have this center. There was another interesting moment in the design when we wanted to provide security gates, so nobody would steal any books, bring anything out, and the president of the library was like, hang on, why would that be a problem? What's the worst that can happen? Another book out in the community? We want that. That's our mission. So we thought that was very interesting. We really love this project. And similarly to the arch theme, our recently completed extension to the St. Louis Symphony that doubles the public spaces, the circulation spaces, takes a bit of a reference to the Saarinen Arch, of course, but really it opens up again a building that's been very exclusively keeping neighborhoods out. There's a historical black neighborhood just on the other side of the street that the building really put its back towards it. So our new extension really opens it up, shapes the public spaces on the outside, and creates this wonderful circulation spaces on the inside, inviting the city and the people and the neighbors in. Another form of community bringing people together is this restaurant, this very small restaurant in Tokyo that we did in collaboration with Ghetto Gastro, the Bronx Space Food and Arts Collective that uses food as a way of bringing people together. And the concept was to have a cast of rotating chefs, holding residences of a few months in the space, and we decided to put the chefs on stage. It's almost like a proscenium. You can pull back the curtains and make work visible. And we collaborated with the Japanese flower artist, Azuma Makato, that in a nod to the chefs from all the different areas in Japan and globally, selected and picked these plants and flowers, freeze-dried them, and put them in resin, so to memorialize them forever. We thought that was really interesting, especially since we built this project all remote during COVID, and the notion of if absence makes your heart feel grower, makes it fun to be grow. If absence makes your heart feel, yes, exactly. Sorry, my English. Then what does the absence of smell do to you? So then, and this is another example of a project that we finished very recently. It's a strategic collaboration with Canada Goose. We worked on their global retail concept. And I came across in our archives this photography that a colleague of mine took when they traveled up to the Arctic Circle to do a collaboration with the Austrian lighting company Zumtobel. So they traveled to the Arctic Circle to hold a series of interviews and conversation with the 4 centenarians that still live there. And they wanted to research how light or the absence of light shapes the behavior and the well-being of someone, and how light and time, how this, what the relationship is. And we were really struck by this image of the shifting light of the sky. You know, you have me being Swiss, I guess, you know, having a bit of a tunnel vision, but you know, growing up in a valley, but still you have this wideness. So we felt that was a really interesting starting point to a concept that evolved through our collaboration with Canada Goose as a purveyor of really, really warm parkas that enable you to go out and explore outside. And this is our flagship store we did with them. We opened with them about 2 months ago in Paris. And the moment you walk in, you do notice how the acoustic, the light, everything kind of calms you down. It gets calmer. Your pulse goes down a bit, and you come off from very busy Champs-Élysées. So then you have like this space that is really calm and quiet. We use these aluminum pieces that are assembled together, all mechanically fastened. It's a kit of parts, can be easily taken apart for further use and moving around. We balance it a bit with wood. The wood is always a nod to the locality, the spaces. So this is Paris, so we use a lot of white oak in a nod to the Haussmannian apartments. We think about the legacy of the brand. In Milan, we use the darker walnut, the noce di canaletto. We have terrazzo with Cippo de Grey as a nod to Milano. We use Inuit artists, Ningukulu TV to the left in an intaglio way to not just hang art on the wall, but really make it a piece of the structure. An integrated piece, and more contemporary artist, Alexa Hatanaka to the right. And more recently, we opened, or also in September this year, we opened 113 Spring here in Soho. And we worked very tightly together with the client to come up with a retail concept that goes beyond the traditional selling of products, but really thinking about customized wellness services. But we also thought about the notion of longevity and sustainability. These types of spaces usually have maximum 5-year tenancy lease contract. So it's really important how you approach this very short amount of time. So instead of having your typical partitions, we have these whale system that can be installed and deinstalled very quickly. There's a take-back program with the fabricator. We use all mineral paint, of course. Instead of pouring terrazzo or concrete, we use this wood system. It's a very new wood system that you, solid wood, oak wood, but you can install it and disassemble it within hours. It's a really cool system. Very, very well thought out. The millwork pieces are all done to be disassembled and come apart in smaller pieces, and we hope once the store is no longer in use, there will be people that are interested in using these furnitures, take them back. Similar with some of the aluminum counters also, we used recycled aluminum, 25% recycled content. Now there's 40% recycled content available, but even getting at the time the 25% was really hard. So there's a lot of interesting metrics we've already been able to measure. We also have a custom chair that is 3D printed out of recycled plastic. So we were able to divert about 20,000 bottles of plastic bottles from the ocean floor, and we're having them in the store. Yeah, and we do celebrate the fact that everything can be taken apart. You see the visible screws, obviously no glue used, all mechanical fasteners and connections. And finally, I'm going to stop with something a bit more closer to us here. Well, actually, Soho is closer. But a library that is a little bit closer, at the Far Rockaway Library in New York, close to JFK. The customized frit pattern is a collaboration with New York-based artist Jose Parla. The color gradient is a nod to the sunrise over Long Island coast. And really, the space is a celebration of the community. It's a beacon. It's a major investment in the neighborhood. And it is a community center that provides resources and most of all really brings the community together and is a symbol of the pride of the community. And that's it. I think I'm like... Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to show 4 projects, and I'm very, very privileged to say they're all in Scandinavia, all 4 of them, done over a period of 32 years. But I've only got 9 minutes, so I would need actually at least 1 hour, 15 minutes each to show them, and I'm just going to just touch on them. Oops, how do you do the first slide here? But first I wanted a short story, and that is my grandfather was born in Tønsberg, Norway. And when he immigrated to America, he was in the immigration line. And his name was Ole, with an umlaut over the O. And in the spaces to fill out the name, you had to put the last name first. So he put H-O-L-E, the umlaut over the O, comma, C-H-R-I-S-T, because there weren't enough spaces for Christopher. So when he got up to the agent, the guy said, "Holy Christ, you can't have a name like this. Get out of line. Change your name." And the man behind him was Norwegian, and he could speak English, so he helped him. Take away the umlaut and add and get rid of the E and add an L. So my name, H-O-L-L, is a Scandinavian made-up name in the immigration line. Anyway, that's my first great moment in my life because it changed my life. We won the 516 entries. The Kiasma Museum now is 26 years old in the middle of Helsinki. It's really an important cultural space, and I'm not going to tell you about it. You have to go there. It's a wonderful 21 galleries, all with natural light. And it's been restored. They keep it wonderfully. And I'm very proud of that. That was launching my career into Scandinavia. And so when I won that competition, people around the museum were in touch with these people in Norway, and they said, well, do you know that Stephen's ancestors are, I have cousins in Oslo. Do you know that it's, and then they invited me to do the Knud Hamsun Museum in Hamarøy. That was very controversial. We had a concept of building as a body of invisible forces. Knud Hamsun was a great surrealist writer. And it went on for many, many years, but it opened finally because a man in Narvik said, even after the controversy, he said, this building must be built. It's important for Norwegian culture. He went to the government and got them to fund the building, and then we built it, and it's now over 10 years old. And it's really the whole life of Knud Hamsun. And then in Denmark, I was invited again, with mostly Scandinavian architects, to do this competition for the Herning Museum. But this was based on a site where Piero Manzoni, the great fabric artist, they had the largest Piero Manzoni collection. And I had this idea of just the two rectangles that were the basic program of the two types of galleries to drape sleeve-like elements over them and bring the light in along these curves. And it's all in fabric-formed concrete. And that is now actually, they're getting ready to make an expansion. And my last project, which just opened last year, is in the middle of Helsinki, and it's a condominium project, and it was a competition that we won in 2006. You see here, 2006 to 24. My average project takes 8 years from the first sketch to the opening. Well, this one took a lot more than 8 years. And the idea was inside this inner block, you know, the Helsinki housing is really wonderful, stock of housing, but it's usually defining the street edge. And here, because it's an inner block, we decided to try to shape voids and raise the building from 3 levels all the way up to 7 or 5, overlooking the Baltic Sea. And it just comes up, and that's 117 condominiums. But what was really nice is the new developer added very small units, so they're almost like, really affordable housing at the tail as the most expensive unit gets to see the Baltic Sea. And it has a thin membrane we developed so that it's like a ship in a bottle, wooden, but then this membrane is only one layer of glass, and it can be opened up so you can have beautiful sunny terrace on the summertime, but close it in the winter and have a kind of solarium of warmth. All the details, this is one I love to work in Scandinavia because every place we've worked, they really appreciate our attention to detail, material, and craft. And all the way down to doing a meander dog dish. Anyway, that's my 4 projects in Scandinavia. Thank you.
Well, thank you all. This was really so fascinating and different. Yeah, really, yeah, a broad range. I mean, you all get to see such great projects and such a good range of work, both here and in Scandinavia. As I said, some of you have Nordic sensibilities just kind of built into you. So I just wanted to start by asking, the projects that you've shared are at the intersection of this Venn diagram of your past body of work and your practice coming from being influenced by Nordic and Scandinavian practice, your interest in expanding your practice into a new context, So being in Finland and in Denmark, Stephen, and Norway, and going back to your roots, or coming to New York and have influencing the public realm, or creating these beautiful retail and institutional spaces, the culture and traditions of the built environment. I mean, the tactility, the natural materials. I just can feel the woven carpets and the textiles. I mean, I can't resist going shopping whenever we're in Copenhagen or in Helsinki or wherever. So, you know, how do you foster this sense of trust between your firm, the international client, and then, in some cases, the regulatory agencies? Any of you?
Is this working? This is not working.
Yeah, yeah.
Hello?
You have to hold it like
Oh,
Beyonce.
I could
Be
just
a
say that
singer.
all of my work, that these 4 projects were all done in collaboration, deep collaboration. For the Kiasma Museum, we collaborated with Juhani Palasma, one of the great Finnish theoreticians and architects. Bless his.
Yeah, we saw him in August.
88 now. Anyway, so I mean, it's not like something that was done from New York. It was deeply collaborative, and in the case of every one of those buildings, it's more Scandinavian hands working on the drawings than our hands. It's a deep collaboration, and then what I really love about working in Scandinavia is the sense of the contractors caring about craft. Was amazing. You know, it's like, you know, in China it was opposite. I still have a little office in Beijing because I had to open an office because there's no craftsmanship, and we have to make them rip it out and build it again and rip it out and build it again. Nothing like that happened in any of my Scandinavian projects. It was all, there's a deep respect that they have of the craftsmen and the way they treat people that are builders. So to me, it's like it was a light year difference to work in Scandinavia. I would say Japan is equal, but then I would say that's the top for architecture, and they care about architecture. And then at the bottom, well, I won't say that.
I mean, maybe I'll go in the other direction from Scandinavia to the U.S. because I think that's been our work, and I think you know, obviously, we look at things, we look at different problems maybe than you all do, but I think the thing that we import from Denmark the most is a change of mindset, and I think really a lot of the times what we're doing is trying to help people see a different way and help to increase the ambition level for what they can do in their cities. And one of the things that's been helpful, actually, it's interesting, beyond New York, is the story of Times Square in New York. The fact that we can point to that and say that happened, I mean, you can't imagine, like small cities, big cities, places all across the country, and even in Central and South America, we can point to that and say, like, hey, look, if they can do that in New York City, like the most complicated place in the world, then we can do that here. And so I think a lot of our work is really just building more confidence in the people that are trying to do this work in their own cities, cheerleading in a way. So yeah, it's a lot of just like getting people to look a little bit in a different way. And when that happens, it's incredible how much change can happen. It's really transformational. We actually bring a lot of our clients to Copenhagen and put them on the bikes. Just have them ride around the city. And that in and of itself changes your mind.
Yeah, it's interesting, yeah. Having, you know, before coming to New York, I lived for 6 years in Toronto, and before that in Switzerland. I'm from Switzerland. So going from Zurich to Toronto and then from Toronto to New York, I was always struck that the cities wouldn't look more outside of their own little, you know, village, if you will, and see how others are doing it, because there's so many examples around the world where they tried it. And, you know, sometimes you just got to try it, but it's like it was mind-blowing to me that it took so long in New York because
Yeah,
There's-
it happens much faster in many other cities in the U.S. than it does in New York.
and about collaboration, exactly, having like local architects, architect of records, having the good fortune to be able to work in countries where craftsmanship is really something. Well, it's a different system, right? It's a different form of thinking about education, where technical schools and that stuff is valued. People learn something in depth. There's like amazing craftsmanship in Switzerland, Scandinavia, but Italy, Japan. So the best thing is really if you work on a project in the US and you have a client that may be international and has the desire to really keep that level up, or has seen enough that they know, there's really a quality to uphold, and that makes some of the examples you just showed, it's fantastic, but making that in the US at times will make me a little nervous, because you need to make sure that you find contractor that can really make a surface that pristine, and yeah.
I'm looking at this
Yeah.
thinking, oh
Yeah.
my God, it's so beautiful, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it takes so much. In terms of how do you, I feel like craft and materiality there's a certain humanness to this, and how do we foster that in our own culture here in the States? I think it's much more individualized or bespoke, and it's always seen as a luxury, but there's an expectation. Well, maybe we should go on. Sorry. Okay, so for this panel and series, we've combined Danish, Norwegian, Swedish, Finnish, Icelandic design under the rubric of Nordic design, and human-centered, socially and environmentally conscious. What makes your practice distinct from those of other Nordic countries?
Well, I feel Nordic, so I'm not distinct.
Okay.
So I can't answer that.
All right. Okay. All right. So I'd leave it to you two.
Well, I have to admit, like, my experience in the Nordics is very narrowly around Copenhagen, right? So it's very, very much about my experience in Denmark. And so I probably am not qualified, actually, to say how we're unique within the context of the other countries in Scandinavia. I think, you saw what we do. Like, our practices in and of itself is pretty unique, I think. So.
Yes, you've
In the
carved
world.
out.
Yeah, we
all
carved
that
out a little
public
niche.
space,
Yeah.
all that. What is it? Yes, in New York, my statistics on public space are that parks in New York are 14% of our city, and streets are 26% of our city. So really, taking those over is a big component of our city, and most successful cities are at least 50% public space. So, yeah, something to work toward.
Yeah, and it's an interesting question, because I do feel we share with all the offices in the different location, we share a common DNA, but there's certainly local nuances. The offices in Asia tend to have different kind of project types also than the ones in Oslo, or it would be here, or Innsbruck has a very different vernacular almost, if you will. But maybe one of the things that is perhaps a bit different is what I touched on earlier, that we have architects, landscape architects, interior architects, product designers, and we practice the disciplines transdisciplinary. So really try to, like in an orchestra, right? When you try to see the possibilities and the opportunities of another instrument and really see what that new outcome might be.
Yeah, it sparks inspiration, right? Okay, I will ask you one more question, and then I will open it up to all of you, because I think you are the ones who are the most interested in asking a question or making a statement. In terms of, I think I'll ask Stephen. How does your artistic practice, because I had met you through Storefront, and for art and architecture and poetry, I know has been an important part of your life, but how does your artistic practice influence your architectural practice?
Every day, I'm making watercolor drawings every day, little paintings in the morning, like a kind of meditative activity that sometimes feed into the project that's at hand. Other times they just stand as works. And with my wife, Dimitra Zaccarelia, who's also an architect, partner in the firm, we teach a class called Architecture Apropos Art at Columbia University. It opens next week, by the way, first day. And we get 60-some students applying for 12 positions to actually meditate on exactly that question. And I think today, more than any other time in recent history, it's an urgent question, because I think the commercialism of architecture practices has taken over and is draining that artistic art, poetry, music, sculpture, painting connection that architecture always had throughout history. That's how I start my class. The first lecture is going through history and then coming up through the different centuries of how these things were, united and how they get separated.
Thanks. Okay, so we open it up to you. And there will be some roving mic. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Caitlin Begg. I run Authentic Social, which is an applied research lab at the intersection of sociology and technology. And I do about 50% of my work in Northern Europe, a lot in the Netherlands where my family is, but also in Scandinavia. And Matthew, I was very interested in something that you said around prioritizing the technical over social. So I focus a lot on this in my work and designing a socio-technical future, but something that I notice a lot between my work in Scandinavia and also Northern Europe and the US is that socio-technical design is not prioritized. So how can we make that shift in the US and make people prioritize that joint optimization of people and technology and make them realize that it's not in our best interest to prioritize the technical over the social? Because sometimes just this initial breakthrough is the hardest part.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the challenges with that is that human beings are actually incredibly capable around optimizing around one or two things, right? And so we're going to go to the moon. That's the thing. All right, everybody gets together, does a lot of incredibly complex stuff to get to the moon. And then, we have this, each of us has this thing in our pockets, and they said, make a thing that'll hold our attention better than anything else in the world. And all the geniuses in the world get together and they make that happen, right? And so I think we're kind of pushing back a little bit against human nature. Maybe that's going too far. I think we have a very and I like engineers before I say this, but we have a very engineering-focused society, and engineers have a tendency to be asked, what are you going to optimize around? This is why I brought up the street safety thing. Okay, we're going to optimize around making sure that automobiles, I have this slide that I didn't have time to present that shows the evolution of the interior of the automobile. And if you sit in an automobile now, it's the most human-centered design thing you could possibly imagine. I sit there, I grab the steering wheel, and there's literally a place for where my pinky goes on the steering wheel, right? And then the exterior of the car, outside of it, is just purely optimized to get that car around in a place. And so I think that trying to get to people's hearts, actually, I know this sounds very woo-woo, but get to people's hearts and reframe the question as often as we can. And I have to say, maybe also not using words like socio-technical, just to be fair. trying to frame the problem in a much more broad sense, right? Like, again, what would change your life? Make my street safe. Yes, but what would actually change your life? My life, like I have a daughter who's 10 years old. I want to be able to let go of her hand and not worry about her safety, and she goes and has a social life outside of my apartment building. That would change my life, right? So designed for that. So I think it's about changing the design brief, essentially. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's the way I think about that.
Other questions? Then we've got a hand here in the middle and a couple over here, 3 over here.
Hello, I have 2 questions. One for Matthew. I think all this waterfront in Copenhagen is beautiful. I agree. But then obviously the question comes up, how do you deal with climate change? And presumably that's an issue in Copenhagen as well, I assume.
No, there's no climate change in Copenhagen.
Okay. So I was just wondering how I know in New York, for example, just read that they did something in Lower Manhattan at the park facing the Statue of Liberty to fortify it for whatever the next
Sea level rise.
yeah, the next standing or whatever. So that would be a question for you. More general question for maybe everybody on the panel. I know we have a new mayor in the city. Maybe any ideas or jump starters, what can the mayor do to maybe promote architecture in the city? Or how can architecture help him accomplish his goals, so to speak?
So just to be clear, the Copenhagen waterfront example was just an example of what it looks like when a city commits itself over time to do something extraordinary like that. And not every city has a waterfront, and so there are other ways to do that. And I think, so just to clarify on that one, the climate change question is huge. I don't know if I can answer that here just like in a few minutes. I think from our perspective, what we want to see are solutions that, again, this goes back to the engineering thing. How can we have climate adaptation solutions that are usually very highly engineered, but can we do them in a way where you have a win-win-win-win kind of situation, right? So if we're fortifying the waterfront, for example, in order to manage sea level rise, there's a way to do that looks like the Army Corps of Engineers is doing it, right? And it's just a wall and it's doing the thing, but everything else sucks. We've sucked the life out of that place. So how can we, and people are so creative and thoughtful. There's so much in us to come up with better ideas than that. But I think we need to reframe those conversations around infrastructure and say, how do we do climate adaptation, but do it in a way that offers, something beautiful, many other things. We're not going to get this done if everything continues to be single-use design. And then I'll just do the quick thing on Mamdani is there was a huge push in the Bloomberg administration. It got carried out a little bit with de Blasio and then sort of left fallow, I think, for a little while, about doing all these wonderful improvements across the city, but let's start pushing to make them permanent. Like the city of New York deserves more than plastic paint and these little, yellow and white sticks that are stuffed up everywhere. Like that, the intention of that was to test the idea and see if it worked. And I think everybody's pretty much universally agreed that those spaces are good and they should stay. So it would be wonderful to see a real commitment to doubling down and actually doing them like Snøhetta did with Times Square in a beautiful and permanent way. So,
Talk to the mayor. Yeah. We have a new mayor.
Exactly. Create demand. Well, I think, the question about what's happening with the Big U and Lower Manhattan facing the Statue of Liberty and the harbor. I remember in Battery Park how the landscape design by Pete Odolf was really about how to remove fences and how to make the hardening of the infrastructure less visible. So he created these vast stretches of shrubbery or so that you would be blocked from falling off a wall, but it was always so beautiful because you saw all these flower beds and other things, and you were surrounded by nature. And so I think there are creative ways of combining that infrastructure that we need with the beauty that we're also asking to, have a joyful environment to surround us with. So, yeah. Okay. Other questions? There were a few over here. Yes, thank you.
Hi, thank you all for being here. I'm an artist, creative director, and experiential designer. I have a question about scale. A lot of the stuff that we've looked at is huge and amazing. I live in Clinton Hill in Brooklyn, and you too? Yeah. Shout out to Clinton Hill. And we just lost a coffee shop on the corner that was there for 25 years. That was a hub of community activity that was amazing in terms of transgenerational and social class and everything. And so it got me thinking about bubbles, in terms of bubbles. And have you guys done any thinking about carving out spaces in cities that are smaller versions of libraries, community spaces, churches, where people don't have to spend money of any kind, and that aren't necessarily oriented around a particular theme, because that further silos people, like on social media. In recent years, I'm almost 60, and I've seen like how in the recent years people are just so in their niches. Even if it's awesome nerdcore, you're in your hole, And so what I loved about that space was that somehow it escaped hipster branding, and I don't know, it was just like this weird space. So my question, sorry, so long in the exposition, is have you given any thought to those types of possibilities, both architecturally, like what that would look like, and just sort of thematically? Is that a question? Yeah.
Yeah, I have a lot to say about that, but I also want to make sure. I always have a lot to say.
Go ahead.
I mean, so the slides that I skipped on social infrastructure, if you're interested in that, that's a whole study that we did over the last, I would say, year and a half to identify and create sort of typologies around those kinds of spaces. And we actually went to places in the world that were at once places of significant conflict to see how those places, those hubs, havens, actually were operative in bringing people together and in creating the opportunities for peace in those places. So it was like Belfast and places like that. So afterwards, I can tell you where to go look for that. But there's a lot of thinking around this. It's not just us too, but there's a lot of thinking around this. I think in New York is particularly challenging because there is a real estate economic issue that creates, I think, what you're talking about. And a lot of other cities in the U.S., like mid-sized American cities, they have the opposite problem. And so we're trying to actually use those spaces to spark a new kind of center of gravity in a downtown, for example, that is trying to be revitalized. So it's sort of a give and take.
Well, I also think about, there are all these privately owned public spaces. And a lot of times the developer will just, create it, put whatever they, put a chair or a bench, and then that's it. So how do we, as the community, occupy those spaces ourselves and activate them? There's also community gardens, and that you don't have to have an exchange, that you can actually just be there. I had worked with, in my past career, had worked with the Department of Transportation, and just even placing a city bench was controversial, right? But hey, it's like people need to sit down. They need to sometimes they're walking with their kids in the stroller or something, or you just need to take a rest. But now we're concerned about, unhoused people sleeping there or something else. But at the same time, what about regular people who just need a rest? So how do we learn to activate those, what kinds of design elements and also social infrastructure can we build to activate those spaces and really reclaim them?
You know, I walk to work on the High Line, and I must say, I really appreciate the benches.
Yeah.
Because when you get older
Yeah.
and you're walking along, you like to sit down for a moment, you know. And by the way, I was the first person to try to transform the High Line. We did the Bridge of Houses in 1980, 81, 82, and we proposed a public promenade space, a series of houses that were built over the High Line. And I used to sneak up there before it was a public space, but way back when. And I saw the last boxcar of frozen turkeys pulled down, where they were there was a fight to try to save it as a train link, but the warehouses were all going bad. But I think that the High Line is a fantastic success story. You know, it's an amazing reuse of an old piece of urban infrastructure. And by the way, it's up to the mayors. Remember that Giuliani had a tear-down order. And Bloomberg, the first thing he did when he came in as mayor is he tore that up. It came that close to tearing the High Line down, you know. And so it's up to the mayors. And now we have a new mayor. He's pro, human life and dignity. I think we have a very optimistic, for our city, maybe not for the country, but for our city. It's an optimistic moment, I think.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, when I first, when I went to Toronto, I was amazed how few publicly accessible or non-commercial spaces they were. Same in New York, and it changed quite a bit, but it's still. It takes not a lot. It takes exactly a little bench or something, and exactly the new mayor can. That is something, that I feel like really creating public space, non-commercial public space, and then, like the person with the little store or the cafe. It's up to them. They can also put something out, and. It's tricky because, you have to deal then perhaps with someone being there that you don't want to, but that is life in a city, right? And
Yeah, I think the thing that's interesting about New York, and the High Line is a good example of this, is like in a place like New York, you have to kind of really get creative and like look for the nooks and crannies or the elevated train that people had no idea you could have a public space for. And to just pick up on what you're saying, it doesn't take that much. Like we have this saying, it doesn't cost that much to be sweet to people in the public realm. And so, I think the other thing is to just like really start to observe, because there's a lot more of this going on than I think we really see. There's like I used to live in Lefferts Gardens, and I love the fact there because seasonally, all of a sudden these like offset smoker barbecue like smokers would show up and just get chained to a tree, and that became like a street food restaurant with some tables and chairs, like kind of guerrilla style, of course. But when you give people the chance, a little bit of a chance, they'll put the life into the space, and so I don't know. I think we could be a lot. We could, COVID was interesting, right? Because a lot of stuff that was impossible one day became totally possible the next day. There's no way we can do street eateries. There's no way we're going to do any of this stuff. It's impossible. The lawyers are going to be all over us. It's going to take 3 years to get permits, yada, yada, yada. And then like COVID, and then 2 weeks later, everybody was like, oh no, I think we can do it. We can totally do this. And then they did it. And the Hot Toddy became like the killer app of public space design.
Other questions? Oh gosh, we have a lot over here. Out here in the front.
Hi, my name is Lori Gwen Shapiro. My name is Lori Gwen Shapiro. I'm a journalist, and I often write about lost history, especially with New York. And I love modern architecture. I'm a big fan of yours. I wanted to know, though, what is lost. Like, for example, with Times Square, there is this open space, but there is I sometimes think about Jane Jacobs and the loss of grit. And I wonder, when you're doing a lot of these planning sessions, do you think about what gets lost when we lose the grit of a city?
Do you think we lost the grit in Times Square because it was because the plaza?
So because of what?
Do you think we lost the grit in Times Square because of the plaza? Because they took the cars out?
I don't
or?
know. I'm a native New Yorker, and there's a lot to like, and there's also a lot that I remember that is not there anymore.
I feel like the grit was lost in Times Square. This is just my opinion. When the highly commercialization of the retail and the real estate around the square happened.
What about the peep shows?
Yeah, I mean,
Well,
how
they were zoned out of
Yeah.
Times Square.
But I guess I would say I would say I don't think that's a separate issue in my opinion than creating more space for New Yorkers on foot, which is what we were doing in the plaza.
We'll get to you.
Hi, so I'm a fifth-year architecture student, and my thesis is also about how can I get public space more designed in Jackson Heights, Queens, which is a very, very intriguing but very hard. I've been working on it for the last 6 months now, and it's very hard to figure out that how can we design these public spaces so that when I stop designing, the design doesn't stop. Like, how do I get people to activate those spaces in ways that they seem is appropriate? Because I know that right now in Jackson Heights, if there is a pedestrian, the shopkeepers who are right outside, adjacent to that pedestrian are going to bring out their best-selling products into the street or into the sidewalk, and people are going to love it that, oh, this store sells this. Inside this store, there are 3 more stores inside. So one, it does violate the protection policy that we read in books of Gehl, but how can we cultivate that, and how can we, it does obstruct the pedestrian pathway, it does slow us down, or people, children and old people can't walk through it, but it's also the heart of Jackson Heights. So it's kind of difficult. How do you balance these both, and how do I make sure communities keep designing these infrastructures after a project is completed?
Sorry, Matthew.
I think there's probably a couple questions in there, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry.
I think in terms of the question about how do you keep things going, this is again where the culture shift has to happen around the way public space is not just designed but managed and operated. And then also I think the way that people feel like they have agency or not over the destiny of that public space. Does that make sense?
Right.
And that work is not about the drawing on the page, although that is a helpful tool. Mm-hmm. I think that's almost like a community building project.
Correct.
Right?
Yes.
And then the community, and then there's a dialogue within the community that can negotiate perhaps the conflicts that you're talking about. Because there's only a set amount of space available. Yep. The other one, and I don't know which particular space that you're looking at, but is to see if it's possible to reduce to do like a road diet, basically, right? If that space is being used by more people on foot and for commercial uses and all the other things, it might make more sense to rebalance the street. Right, and I know that's a huge heavy lift in New York, but that's certainly the things that we've done. And we worked in Nashville, Tennessee, and we worked in this place where down in Lower Broadway, where they have millions of people are there. They have volumes, pedestrian volumes on that street that are the same as 42nd Street in front of Grand Central, which seems bonkers, right? And because Nashville is that place is where they drink more Budweisers per capita whatever per hour than any other place in the United States, there were some conflicts happening because there were more people on the sidewalks and they were spilling into the street and people were getting hurt. And the solution in that case was to just say like, hey, what's more important to you? Is it more important to get the cars to move through here? Is it more important to make this successful place even more successful by making it safer for all the wonderful life that you've brought into this place?
Right.
So, did I sidestep your question? It's
No, it
possible.
doesn't. Well, I did bunch of community engagement with Jackson Heights people. They very much love their roads for some reason because like loading, it's full of retail stores and easily accessible to load in their businesses. And then the other side, when talking to professors, parklets are a kind of concept where you take out parking, and that's a form of design. I was wondering if there is a balance between the sidewalk and the road and creating a plaza or...
Well, one thing is that a lot of people think about the street as being one way always, and we need to get beyond that because the street is actually very different at 9 p.m. than it is at 7 a.m., than it is at 11, than it is at, right? And I think one of the ways to navigate that conversation is say like, yeah, there should be times where it's much easier to load and load out, and then there are other times where we need to shift the whole way that street works. And there's a lot of people that know way more about that than I do, and a lot of like very deep research on that. But there's a lot out there on that, on curb management, basically.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks for picking me. Today I have a lot of questions about New York City, but I'm more interested into Nordic, of course. I'm Holl. I'm an architect in New York City, and I'm pretty sure to have been to the Stephen Yu and Dimitri's architecture and art in Columbia GSEP. And so for the Nordic, because I originally from Taiwan, and then when I travel at Europe for 2 months, a grand tour, West Europe, South Europe, but for me the most amazing, intriguing me is like Nordic design, like Finland, Sweden, Copenhagen, of course. Just like I like Finju, I like Anne Elkson, I like Avalto, I like a lot of design, I like Stephen your work and Gehl's, of course. And so what I'm thinking about, because when I'm doing creation, I'm thinking like self-reflection. Does I stand for some kind of like Taiwanese identity? And so my question is like, does when you create, doing public, involve city infrastructure and with the interior design, and when you do your art and architecture, does this kind of identity, are you self-awareness of this identity, or any inspiration have from culturally, or your experiences, or what kind of this kind? Does this drive your design and your creation and your public involvement? Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's very important. Every culture is very different. And I've had this great opportunity to do this large project, 8 towers that are linked by bridges in Beijing. Linked hybrid is called. You might have been there. And, you know, we worked on it with a team of locals, and it's a different culture, you know, just how it's going to be used, and to try to make, you know, one of the problems in Beijing is, at the time when we built this is the largest geothermal heated and cooled project, 660 wells, 100 meters deep. So it was like state-of-the-art recycled water. So everything was like state-of-the-art green. But the thing that really makes it valuable is the fact that you can live, work, recreate, go to a cafe, go to a cinema in one place without having to drive across the city. Sometime in Beijing, it can take you half a day to get across the city if you have an appointment or you have. So one of the great things about this complex is it's like a city within a city. People don't have to drive anywhere. They can work there, live there, you know, have their cafe, and you know, cinema was just being opening up at the time when we were designing it, 2002. And we really brought in international cinema, and they had like, I think that's seven cinema houses in this complex in the center, and we added all these pieces of program into the project. The condominium desire for the developer was reached, but we added all the little parts and pieces to make this a lively chunk of a city. And one of the things we realized when we were working on it is if we could make a sort of down a flight of stairs subspaces, you could have someone who just sews, you know, men's clothes, and they could have a shop. Or you could have a little a dry cleaning operation, not on the front layer, but one flight slightly down, you could, So in other words, we were thinking deeply about how to insert little fragments of programs that revitalize this city within a city as part of the architectural project. And the developer just went along with it. All they wanted to do was have the most published buildings, when the 2008, they didn't make it, by the way. 2008, was the Olympics, so it opened a year later, but they just said yes. Every time we wanted to add another program, they just said yes. So
Stephen,
that was a very interesting, and we have our office in that complex now because, you can, Anyway, it's that was for me, very different than Scandinavia, very different than Japan. It's really a Chinese city within a city.
What motivated you, if the developer wasn't asking for those things? Like, what was your process for saying, like, well, we should add this and we should add that? And
it was, the process, it all happened so fast, it's hard to even know. They just didn't say no to things that we were proposing. It was a strange. For example, even at the beginning of the project, they wanted me to put a curtain walls on these 8 towers. They already had the planning approval, right? They wanted to keep this old factory in the middle and repurpose it. I said, wait, give us 2 months and 200,000, and we're giving you a vision. So we worked really hard, and we made this incredible model where we made the Cinematheque, the water gardens in the middle, a kindergarten school, and we linked all the towers with bridges, and we put swimming pool and a theater, and we proposed it to them, and there was silence for about a month, and then suddenly I got an email, and they said, this is because they want to be in the Olympics. They want to really, and they said, we've analyzed your project. Your budget greatly exceeds our budget. However, we've decided to build everything. Don't take anything out. It was unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Yeah, that's a rare client.
No, but all of these things that happen to architects, how did this happen? My old friend, the artist Walter Di Maria, said there's 3 things. You have to be in the right place, at the right time, with the right idea. And now China's not happening, so I don't know how many ideas you want to bring to China. You're trying to go to Shenzhen, but it's not like it was. When I was there, every time I went there, they give me another project. It's like unbelievable, and it's not happening like that now.
Here, Nadia.
Hi, I'm a bit nervous asking questions. I usually don't ask them. I'm Nadia Nyelina. I run an international practice called Org. We are based in New York and Brussels. I want to just a small comment about Copenhagen and climate adaptation. There's a fantastic thing you can look up. It's called Cloudburst Plan for Copenhagen that has been implemented over the last 18 years, I think, something like that. And that's an example of climate adaptation actually resulting in fabulous public space. And it covers the whole city. I have a hopefully provocative and inspirational question to Susan, with everybody else as well. Really to you as an influencer. I've been listening to a lot of people talk about the new mayor. I am personally very excited about him. But there is the sense that everybody is expecting something from him. And I want to ask you, how do you, as somebody who has worked with multiple administrations, see the role of our architectural community in actually influencing the mayor and offering something to him instead of expecting? Because I hear a lot of ethos of, well, yesterday I was at the preservation meeting, no, I'm not going to mention where, and I heard this strong sense of preservationists just hating the city of Yes and only saying the negative things about the city of Yes. And I thought that was extremely disturbing. And basically anticipating this sort of, already taking a contrarian position with respect to the new administration. So that felt very uncomfortable. But design doesn't cover the high design. There's also housing. There are a lot of experiences that we can bring from Europe, from Nordic Europe, with respect to housing, with respect to public space. But we have to deliver it. And the real question is how? Because I worked under Bloomberg at West State when foreign architects were all brought in and we were listened to. We were the celebrities at the moment. Everybody wanted the Dutch and the Danish, etc.
Ovink and
But exactly, but things changed. And there's a sense that we lost traction, we lost our role, but does it have to be that way? Sorry for long-winded.
No, not yet. I mean, so I had worked under Koch, as you mentioned. I worked from Koch through Dinkins and Giuliani and the Bloomberg administration in the Department of Cultural Affairs. And as much as you think museums and zoos and botanical gardens don't touch everything, they touch streets, they touch, parks and all these different parts of our city. And I also have been a big part of the AIA, the American Institute of Architects, and the Urban Design Forum. And I think, really, I'm looking at all of you, and I'm thinking you have great ideas. You need to speak up to your local city council people and demand or suggest and have them be your spokespeople to the mayor, as well as the architectural community itself needs to come together. Nadia, you say the preservationists are saying no, 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 and then the housing people will say yes, 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 right? But we have to have one voice and be able to put forward 5 ideas, 10 ideas that are very clear and implementable. And so don't just complain, but really bring forward a vision. Like Stephen, you talked about, you presented the developer with a vision. And that's what we as urban designers, as architects, as planners do, right? And so not to complain, how to shape and persuade. And for me, it's both public advocacy in a way that I don't think we think of ourselves as designers, but not as necessarily as leaders, as advocates. People will say, well, I'm advocating every day in my job. Well, this is something that you can step up as a leader and actually see things happen and be optimistic. I like to think of designers as being optimistic. So, yeah. But, and Rachel, I feel like you've been left out of some of this conversation. So I'm going to ask you a question about wellness and well-being. And I think that that's really a key part of what we as designers don't always, think intentionally about. It could be mental health, it could be physical well-being. We all want clean air, we all want clean water. I think about the swimming in the Hudson River. Hey, that is a dream. And I still remember when Diana Nyad found a spaghetti in her bathing suit or something like that. Was kind of creepy. Yeah.
Stone is spaghetti.
No. Yeah. Okay. So, designing wellness in your projects, and how do you, some of your projects are very short term, and then some of them are really longer term. You think about libraries and cultural institutions. So how do you, as an architect and designer, really incorporate wellness?
Yeah, it's a good question. I feel especially in North America, there's really less.
Without going to a gym, building in a gym in every facility.
Yeah. No, what struck me when coming to North America was the lack of community spaces, and I felt like libraries are taking that position a bit, creating these non-commercial spaces. There's infrastructure invested into facilities for people coming in, and that's really great. And we're working on a rec center up in Harlem, so having these spaces that non-commercial. I mean, in a city where you have all these fitness studios where you can spend quite a lot of money, being healthy. And it's amazing that you have at least, a few parks you can run. The waterfront has gotten much better to run. The bike spaces have gotten better, way better than they used to be. So that's really good. But, thinking about in direct or indirect ways how wellness or just kind of easing one's mind can be a part of the design is interesting. And we do have a collaboration. I have a collaboration with a Swiss designer and experiential designer that thinks a lot about these wellness pods. They're called breathing pods, and it's a really great way of just calming the senses down, bringing everything, the pulse down a bit. Yeah, and but someone said something about the shift in scales of the project. I mean, I'm thinking of the Calgary Library, where, for example, we brought in wood from the surrounding areas. But the wood really symbolizes that thing you can touch. Shifting scales. What can you touch? How are your senses activated? How do you shift scale and make spaces for people?
Yeah, giving them that variety. Yeah. What is it, every 4 seconds? Yes, Ed, I think, okay, do you have a question? No. Oh, okay. Well, I was going to say, we started with inhaling and exhaling slowly, and we've ended with the inhale and exhale slowly. So I think we've reached our time, and we really thank you all for joining us this evening, and thank Stephen, thank Anne Rachel, and Matthew. Yes, this has been a wonderful conversation.